Betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. It seeps into your veins, poisoning your trust, leaving an icy clarity in its wake. I never expected my partner, the man I built a thriving business with, to pull the rug from under me, to embezzle funds and use my own strategies to erase my existence. It was more than a financial blow. It was personal. I had taught him everything. He wasn't just a partner. He was a reflection of my trust and ambition, and he shattered it. At first, I grappled with confusion and anger, my mind racing with the injustice of it all. But then something shifted within me. The raw pain dulled to a quiet, calculated rage. No longer would I react emotionally. I would harness this betrayal. I was going to emerge from the ashes, not in a blaze of glory, but in silence. In that silence, I found my power. I stopped talking. The world moved on, thinking they knew the narrative, but I was watching. Every whispered conversation, every subtle shift in tone around me became a roadmap of information I hadn't seen before. I learned who my allies were, and more importantly, who my true enemies were. They underestimated me. They thought I was gone, and they were right about that. My absence became my greatest weapon. Months passed where I meticulously studied the tactics used against me. I learned to reverse engineer the betrayal, turning his ego into my tool. I would not explode in fury. Instead, I would make him relive every moment of betrayal. He gave me the blueprint, and I intended to use it. Patience became my greatest ally, and each day I sharpened the blade of my revenge. Timing was everything, and I had time. Every calculated disruption I orchestrated sent him spiraling. Legal inquiries began to creep into his operations. Financial audits unearthed cracks in his facade. He was panicking, and I was not angry. I was accurate. I reveled in the process, understanding that true power lies not in grand upheavals, but in the art of chess. This was just the beginning. Sometimes, the best revenge is not to strike back, but to orchestrate a masterpiece of self-reclamation. And I was ready to produce my magnum opus. The air felt thick in the aftermath, suffocating and pregnant with unsaid words. Standing amidst the ruins of my shattered trust, I wore a mask of grace while the storm raged within. The betrayal had stripped everything bare. I forced myself to breathe, to embrace the stillness that enveloped me like a shroud. My world had collapsed, but I would not follow it into the abyss. Instead, I would retreat into the shadows, becoming a specter of my former self. I ceased all communication. Friends called, colleagues texted, but I left them hanging in a void. No explanations, no defenses, only silence. My absence became the perfect cloak under which I could observe, deciphering every nuanced shift in loyalty and treachery that had eluded me before. It was liberating in its own sinister way. The people I'd once considered allies revealed their true colors, while opportunists circled like vultures, eager to feast on distress. I noted every glance, every whispered conversation, accumulating information to be used later when the moment was right. Days bled into weeks, each one sharpening my resolve. I became a ghost, watching my betrayer flounder beneath the weight of his own hubris. He was no longer the partner I had once trusted. He was a puppet, dancing on strings he could not see. Every misstep he took became a thread in a tapestry of my revenge. He thought himself secure, flashing his smile in meetings, his laugh echoing falsehoods. Meanwhile, I was the shadow lurking at the edges, meticulously charting my course. I began to analyze the very strategies he had weaponized against me. His ignorance of my stillness was my advantage. I dissected every manipulation he had leveraged, the embezzlement, the calculated cruelty, with a surgeon's precision. The more I studied, the clearer my path became. I would mirror his method, employing the techniques he had twisted to my detriment. He taught me how to hurt. Now I would show him. Patience grew my patience into a deliberate weapon. I nobly played the long game while I reallocated resources, instigated legal scrutiny, and activated allies, all without him ever suspecting I was at the helm. Each delay in my actions sharpened my edge, transforming urgency into unshakable control. The quiet moments filled with calculated contemplation became my sanctuary, where scheming replaced shaking fists. With a steady hand, I orchestrated subtle disruptions at first. An audit here, a legal inquiry there, all meticulously executed to escape detection. It worked. His facade began crumbling under the pressure, and I took solace in knowing that he was unraveling while I remained ensconced in silence. I wasn't angry at him anymore. I had become more accurate and surgical. This was just the prelude. I welcomed the calm before the storm, preparing to unleash a cascading symphony of consequences. I wouldn't simply react. I would reclaim every piece he had stolen, returning each blow he dealt in a masterful backlash. The stage was set for my magnum opus, and all I had to do was wait for the right moment to execute my plan. I slipped deeper into obscurity, my existence masked beneath a carefully woven veil of silence. Phone calls went unanswered, emails faded into the ether. The world moved on, lulled into believing I had vanished. In reality, I was always there, a ghost in the machinery of our shared business. I watched, listened, and learned. I imagined myself as a shadow in his office, from the hidden corners of the glass-walled conference room to the faint outlines of his life beyond the desk where he now presumed he reigned. Every call he made, every meeting he attended, became fodder for my recollections, a meticulous record of who he was in moments of unguarded ambition. With each passing day, my motives crystallized, fortifying a resolve born from betrayal. I began to marshal my resources in hushed whispers, reconstituting connections that had once seemed trivial. I crafted an arsenal of allies, ensuring no name was left unexamined, no loyalty untested. The circle of trust had contracted, but beneath the surface, old friendships turned allies, whispered grim insights. They spoke freely, believing I did not have ears in their midst. They did not know I had transformed my absence into a tactical advantage. While he sailed through the waves of confidence, I plotted beneath the surface, reallocating funds, siphoning knowledge, orchestrating torrents of quiet disruption. The audits crept in, silent as the night, and laid bare the cracks in the facade he wore like armor. A misplaced balance sheet here, a discrepancy there. Each anomaly struck at the heart of his carefully constructed illusion, bringing forth dread masquerading as denial. He noticed the tremors. I could see it in his posture, growing taut as the tension in an unstrung bow. The alarm bells inside his head rang unceasingly, yet he remained oblivious to the unseen hand pulling the strings. He would dismiss his discomfort. Arrogance whispered to him that it was but a phase. Each day brought renewed assurance, swathed in ignorance of the storm brewing around him. Weeks turned into months, the rhythm steady and relentless. I absorbed every detail, overheard conversations, partnerships formed, and sentiments shifted. In this realm of hushed undertones and side glances, I grew powerful, harnessing the strength found in shadows. My patience sharpened my edge. I learned that the greatest victory lay not in retaliating, but rather in precision, crafting my counter-offensive with a surgeon's finesse. The moment would come, and when it did, I would be the indiscernible hand that set the pieces into motion. I would mirror his actions until he could see only reflections, never realizing the architect of his ruin stared back at him from the glass surface of his own success. The true artistry of revenge blossomed not in wrath, but in the subtlest flickers of vengeance. My magnum opus was being composed, note by note, in silence. I began to reflect on the very lessons he taught me, the strategies he wielded like weapons against me. I dissected his tactics, sifting through the rubble of betrayal he left in his wake. The fine art of deception became my canvas, and I was ready to paint. Revenge wasn't about brute force. It was precision. I would linger in the shadows, maneuvering my pieces with careful intent. I gathered my allies in hushed meetings, cloaked in the guise of casual catch-ups. Each conversation was a calibration of trust, every laugh a sharpened knife. I fed them information, a misplaced order here, a flicker of doubt there, each ripple carefully calculated to destabilize his confidence. He thought he had escaped my grasp, but he was unknowingly stepping into a web of my design. As days turned into weeks, the consequences of my orchestration began to bloom like dark flowers. Legal inquiries edged closer. Financial audits unfurled like unfurling wings, magnifying the cracks in his operations. While he walked through his days oblivious, I savored his impending disquiet. Each misstep he took only deepened my resolve. The tension in his shoulders became apparent. The confidence that once radiated from him now dimmed under the pressure of unvoiced fears. When he looked in the mirror, did he see the shadow of a man who had made a grave error? I doubted it. He was still wrapped in the hypnotic embrace of his own hubris, believing he was untouchable. But his arrogance laid the groundwork for his undoing. A misplaced document here, an account discrepancy there. Each incident a minor brushstroke, crafting a masterpiece of revenge. I had the advantage of time. My patience was the unseen hand, nudging him closer to the cliff's edge while remaining comfortably out of sight. Every calculated delay, every meticulously placed action, sharpened my edge. What he viewed as casual errors, I understood as the unfolding of my grand design. Waves of calm washed over me. I reveled in the process, no longer bound by fury. I had become precise, a surgeon mapping out an intricate operation. And amid this symphony of silence, I learned the true art of revenge. It wasn't about explosions of wrath. It was a hushed crescendo that built steadily towards the climax, where I would be the conductor standing in the shadows. He didn't realize the pieces were already in play. As whispers turned into grumbles, as partnerships began to fray, my resolve solidified. I anticipated the moment when the truth would dawn upon him. How sweet it would be to watch him grapple with the monster he created, not in my image, but in his reflection. With every calculated disruption, I orchestrated a slow unraveling of his carefully woven tapestry. His world was becoming a stage for my revival, and I could almost hear the faint echoes of his unraveling. The time for my masterpiece was drawing near, painted expertly in shades of retribution. I remained silent, poised, and confident. Everything was in place. All that was left was to let the dominoes fall. The weeks rolled into months, a slow roll of sand in an hourglass, each grain marking the erosion of his confidence. I remained an unseen specter in the corporate corridors, a silent witness to his descent, and the tension that hung in the air became a palpable entity. My absence had wrapped around him like a noose, tightening slowly, and he was oblivious, convinced he had escaped unscathed. As whispers began to echo through the office, my machinations quietly unfurled. Employees who had once cheered for him now exchanged furtive glances, uncertainty painting their faces. An unnoticed accounting error became the first crack in his armor, a simple miscalculation dismissed as a clerical oversight. But to me it was the first ripple in a tide of discord that would engulf him. I meticulously engineered the landscape of chaos, subtle manipulations, sowing seeds of doubt amidst the affluent vines he had grown. Each apparent flaw in his operation fed into the growing anxiety that began to whisper truths he feared to confront. Was it incompetence? Or shadows lurking, threatening his world from corners he couldn't perceive? He still carried himself with an air of invulnerability, a strut of someone who had evaded judgment. I watched him shake hands and share hollow laughs, unaware that beneath the surface the tremors of instability vibrated like a distant storm. His bravado was a mask, easy to peel away, and the moment was mine to seize. Through carefully curated channels, I amplified the pressing whispers, a compelling narrative of internal strife to reach the ears of stakeholders. Subtle hints dropped into strategic conversations, pushed key players to doubt him. Did you hear about the financials? Some things just don't add up. The stirrings of unease took root, shattering the illusion of stability he had so carefully orchestrated. He couldn't see me. Every interaction was a calculated move on my chessboard, trapping him in a web of his own making. I became the ghost that lingered in the rooms he filled with optimism. I reveled in the fact that he assumed himself alone, filled with misplaced confidence. As I delved deeper, my allies became my eyes and ears. They reflected the shifting loyalties, the second-guessing, all punctuated by his name hanging on every worried breath. An opportunity became a weapon, and in his quest to quiet the storm, he would begin to reveal himself, inch by inch. It was a game I had mastered long ago, a hunter's patience in the shadows, waiting for my prey to make the slightest move. The thrill was palpable but still restrained, every essential detail etched into my memory, every flinch of uncertainty on his part. A stone laid atop the foundation of his undoing. And as the walls began to close in around him, I remained positioned perfectly, watching the once proud figure drain of hope. Each day he grew weaker, a ship taking on water. He just didn't know how deep it had already gotten. Invisibility became my cloak. Each piece I moved was unseen, yet it reverberated throughout his world, a haunting echo, sending chills that danced along his spine. The moment approached, the magnetic climax of a dance I had choreographed in silence. When the curtain lifted, he would easily see every fault laid bare, a reflection forged from his own betrayal, consumed by the very echoes of arrogance he once wielded like a weapon. The day he realized it wouldn't be a moment of victory for me, but rather a clash of symmetry. I would show him. I would give him everything he had handed me, wrapped in fragile confidence, turned to dust by his own actions. He was a deer unaware of the predator waiting in the shadows, poised for the strike. And the stage was set, every detail orchestrated to perfection. All that remained was the flick of my wrist, an unseen hand about to enact its masterpiece. The time for witness would soon give way to the thrilling sound of inevitability. Each disruption I set in motion carved deeper into his confidence, a symphony of failure playing orchestrated notes of uncertainty. But in the tide of small victories, I felt a flicker, a tremor, that threatened to upset my design. I saw it in his eyes during meetings. Anxiety dripped from his brow, but I noticed something else, something unsettling. Someone was asking questions. In the shadowy corners of the office, voices began to rise above murmured tones, faintly but unmistakably so. Whispers of a leak, perhaps, circulations of my subtle sabotage. I had been careful, each audit and inquiry executed with the precision of a surgeon. But the whispers were the beginnings of a flaw. My meticulous plan might soon be exposed as just that, meticulous. The pressure began to weigh heavily on me. I quickly recalibrated. Just as a master marksman steadies the aim of his rifle, so too did I align my thoughts. I had come too far to let panic rear its head now, to let it scatter my focus. My resolve would harden, recalibrating to account for this unexpected assault on my strategy. I would adapt. A knife doesn't just sharpen itself. It must endure fire. My own tempering was underway. I reached out to my allies, the informants I had carefully selected. There was no need for caution. This was my foray into deeper waters. I urged them to listen more intently, to observe shadows of doubt pass among the ranks of his closest confidants. Each returned observation was precious to me. Pieces of an evolving puzzle I had to construct with even greater precision. The unease around him deepened, a throbbing pulse of fear amidst the surface appearances of bravado. Someone saw something, so I would turn this into an advantage. I would double down, shape their doubts, feed the paranoia that simmered just beneath the facade of stability he donned like armor. A targeted conversation was all it would take, a single question dropped into the right ears. I purged my voice, innocent, almost disinterested. What are his plans moving forward? Have you noticed anything odd? The ripples spread quietly. Every casual encounter I orchestrated became a thread woven into a wider tapestry of distortion. I remained abstract, a mere flicker in their minds striking the matches of apprehension among my enemies. Trust fractured beneath the surface, impairing his connections as instincts bloomed into suspicion. No victory was without risk. The shadow of failure loomed just beyond my reach. But there was beauty in recalibration, even under pressure. The trick was not to falter, but to tighten one's grip, retain calculated confidence. With every twist of fate, I would pivot. Fear would not stifle me. Focus would guide me through the dark. I took solace in knowing I had never been defeated. I had cultivated an environment of doubt, one I could stir up with the gentlest of nudges, each move intent and deliberate. I smiled inwardly, envisioning how the walls would close in around him, how the edges of his empire would fray as he searched for stability, only to realize, too late, that the very foundation he stood upon was mine to unravel. I was still there, watching, waiting. The thrill of the game was not lost on me. The shadows welcomed my return. The tension ignited my spirit. And as long as I remained in control, the endgame would shift in my favor. All that mattered was the resolve to embrace the chaos I had cultivated, to dance fluidly with the strains of a growing reckoning. He would soon discover that the architect of his downfall drew power not from anger, but from resilience. A blade honed to lethal precision amid the disarray of betrayal, ready to strike when the moment was ripe. My work was far from over, and now I was emboldened by the anticipation of inevitability. I leaned against the darkness, feeling the pulse of the company through the thin walls separating us. I could sense his growing unease, the uncertainty gnawing at him like a rat chewing through rotting wood. My absence had become a suffocating cloak, dragging him down into the depths of his own reckoning. I had cultivated silence into a power he could neither see nor fathom, and now it was time to unleash everything I'd crafted. The methods I had so meticulously studied were poised to strike. Each thread I had woven tightened his noose, each revelation a quiet symphony building to a crescendo. I watched him from the refuge of obscurity, my shadow eclipsing the very throne he tried to maintain with borrowed confidence. Every smile he forced during meetings felt like a brittle mask. I marveled at how hubris made him blind to the storm closing in. Just as he had once disassembled my existence, I had now pieced together his downfall. The legal inquiries I initiated had taken on a life of their own, each query echoing across the conference room like a tolling bell. The financial audits hadn't just exposed discrepancies, they had amplified whispers of treason. In that gray area of doubt, he floundered, desperately searching for scapegoats while I wielded his own playbook against him. Patience was my weapon. I didn't need to strike in fury. My strategy unfolded with a quiet precision I had learned through every betrayal. I meticulously engineered the distractions, the abrupt swings in partnerships, the shake in investor confidence. Each miscalculation became a leaf upon a growing cascade, nourishing the roots of his failure. He was trapped, a marionette dancing on strings I had pulled masterfully, choreographing his downfall in every movement. One evening, I stood far from the boardroom, an observer cloaked in shadows, breathing in the tension that had become so thick you could slice through it like glass. I listened intently as he sputtered excuses, grasping at the air in a room full of executives transformed into doubters. They scrutinized him, pitting his incompetence against their expectations. I felt each power shift sweep over the room like a gust of wind, bending even the most steadfast of loyalties. The beauty of this game was that it was a mirror reflecting not just his failures, but the very methods he had used to erase me. Emotion, chaos, and outbursts birthed insecurity. While I had learned to craft a subtext so intricate, it allowed me to exist in the minds of others without showing my hand. I was the architect of this orchestration, peeling away layers of his stronghold until the core lay exposed, raw and vulnerable. The moment approached, a subtle vibration in the air signaling that he was nearly undone, a beaten king on a chessboard. It was time. As the final pieces fell into place, I readied to strike. This time, the execution wouldn't be revealed through overt violence or anger. Instead, it would be through a calculated boardroom takeover, a deconstruction of his empire executed with precision, all while he was blind to the orchestrator hiding in plain sight. I took a deep breath, soaking in the silence that had become my ally. It was the calm before my storm, and within that calm, I tasted the bitterness of his impending defeat. He would feel what it was like to stand on the other side of betrayal, to witness his own design crumble before him, a design built on my trust. And when the dust settled, he wouldn't see a triumph. He would see symmetry, a perfect reflection of what he had done to me, served back cold and methodical. I didn't need to berate him or create further chaos. His own actions would deliver the punishment he so richly deserved. I had become my own masterpiece, sculpting revenge as a fine art rather than a clumsy assault. A smile crossed my lips, serene rather than malicious. There was power in this, an absolute control over my emotions and the situation. With every passing moment, I knew the balance would tip. He had taught me how to hurt him, and now he would be faced with the consequence of that lesson. Each day unfolded beneath a heavy cloak of tension, a storm lingering just on the edge of the horizon. I could feel it, thick in the air, pressing against my skin, electrifying the atmosphere. I wasn't the only one. My betrayer drifted through the office like a man walking on a tightrope, aware of the storm closing in, yet blissfully ignorant of the true weight bearing down upon him. He couldn't escape it. Fear danced behind his self-imposed mask of confidence, nipping at his heels with each careless step. Every calculated disruption I had put in place rippled through his world, creating fractures too wide to dismiss, a cascade of doubt, eroding his foundation. The whispers echoed around the corner, my allies unknowingly feeding me more ammunition. Each piece of information was a gift, a dark treasure illuminating the vigilance of his closest confidants as they faltered just like him. With calculated ease, I positioned myself in the dark corners of their conversations, a ghost, an echo, where newfound anxiety took root and flourished in the guise of casual banter. He seated himself in meetings, yet while he smiled and spoke, I watched crumpled papers on the table shift as unspoken questions spiraled between the lines. Did you hear about the financial audit? What's going wrong with the investment? Who's pulling the strings? The tremor in his voice was a melody to my ears, a soft symphony of doubt played to the rhythm of his escalating despair. The damage I had inflicted became palpable, a predator circling its prey, honing in closer with every heartbeat. He looked over his shoulder repeatedly, unaware that the shadow looming behind him, patiently waiting for its moment, was me. His arrogance had shackled him to a narrative he believed to be true. But my absence had crafted a new story, one I painted with precision, a masterpiece that fed off his fears and led him deeper into the labyrinth of his missteps. His colleagues' trust faltered as I stoked the embers of suspicion under him. Each conversation I had carefully calibrated was a final touch upon a canvas, each brushstroke pulling him closer to the brink. That tightrope he balanced upon began to fray. The applause of false praises faded into a buzz of skepticism, until at last, hesitation bloomed like wildfire in a dry forest. In moments of solitude, I neither rejoiced nor reveled. I merely watched, absorbing the potency of the moment. He wore worry like a second skin, and I relished every flicker of unease that crossed his face, a fleeting glimpse into the essence of his own undoing. This was all part of the plan. I wouldn't strike fiercely. I would allow the silence to swell until it consumed him. I had relished the thought before. He would drown in the silence I cultivated, the very method he had once orchestrated to erase me. The air grew heavier still as the silence became unbearable, a storm that brewed and boiled just under the surface. I stood poised, a hunter ready to pounce, my breath steady and calculated. All that stood between the lies of his facade and the reckoning I orchestrated was the flick of a switch, a single moment to ignite the fuse. In this chess game of betrayal and vengeance, I was not merely a participant, I was the master. And when the final act played out, he would find himself bound and helpless, standing in the debris of his own creation, a shattered mirror reflecting only the chaos he had wrought. He wouldn't know it was me. No letters, no personal confrontations. Just a chilling silence that spoke volumes every single day. As I sat back, basking in the anticipation, I could almost taste his terror, the sweet satisfaction of watching panic seep into every corner of his world, painting a picture of ruin that would render him unrecognizable. I was close now, The storm was finally reaching its peak, and once the first crack appeared, there would be no escaping the deluge of reckoning that would follow. He may have conquered me once, but the table was about to turn. There is a single truth in this world buried deep beneath betrayal. Every act of fragility reverberates back, and soon he would learn. I wasn't merely waiting, I was preparing, and the time for my masterpiece was drawing near. I stood in the shadows, a puppet master, pulling strings with effortless grace as the final act approached. Every moment was thick with potential, a taut wire ready to snap. The boardroom felt electric, charged with the whispers of uncertainty I had cultivated. But the source of that tension remained blissfully unaware. My absence, woven tightly around him, had become an inescapable shroud, binding him closer to his own fate. The takeover was not merely a business transaction. It was a surgical operation, a precision strike on the heart of his empire. I had orchestrated this moment with the meticulous care of a craftsman, layering each disruption, each distraction, until the fault lines of his confidence had become too pronounced to ignore. Like a sniper, I adjusted my focus, aligning every element of my vengeance until the kill shot was undeniable. He entered the boardroom wearing his mask of bravado, yet I could see the tremor in his hands as he shuffled through the papers, the ghost of suspicion trailing him like a shadow. My allies, those I had gathered in silence, were there too, unsure of what lay ahead but eager for change. Their hungry anticipation mirrored my own as I breathed in the atmosphere rich with the scent of his impending unraveling. I had stripped him of his armor. With every calculated inquiry sent forth, I had dismantled the facade he used to shield himself from scrutiny. The audits had begun as whispers, inconspicuous ripples, and now they roared, a rushing tide that swept away his security. He could no longer find solace in the illusion of control. It slipped through his fingers like sand as reality crashed in. As I watched him fumble for words, I felt the cool satisfaction of the predator preparing to strike. He believed himself the commander of this echo chamber, directing the narrative, unaware of how deftly I had taken control. Every glance around the table, those faces once filled with admiration for him, turned hesitantly toward the source of their discontent, and I relished the mingling scent of betrayal and dread that filled the air. My moment was drawing near, the culmination of all my silence, all my planning. I had made no threats, sent no emails. I had spoken not a single word, yet my presence was undeniable. I was the architect of this operation, an unseen force disrupting the very foundation he had built. He had taught me the language of power and dominance, and now I was prepared to outmaneuver him using his own script against him. I inhaled deeply, savoring the stillness, the gravity pressing between us. He would soon discover that the collapse of everything he built could be traced back to his own hubris, a violent, destructive wave that he could only watch as it consumed him whole. With careful intention, I made my move. I slipped behind the curtain, waiting to pull the final lever in this grand performance. When I stepped out again, it would be to deliver the final act of retribution. He would see the reflection of his chaos staring back at him, and he would know, but too late, who orchestrated this beautifully brutal downfall. He had played his cards. Now, it was my turn to play mine, and let the world bear witness to the exquisite symmetry of justice. Everything was aligned. Everything was finally in place. Silence stretched before us, pregnant with the weight of inevitability. I was ready, and soon He would be nothing but a specter of uncertainty within the void he created. I would vanish again, retreating into the shadows. But this time, my presence would linger, a ghostly reminder of the lessons learned in betrayal. The silence enveloped the boardroom, thick and suffocating, an intruder that dared to shatter the bravado he wore like armor. I watched from the shadows, my presence woven tightly into the fabric of their discourse, my plan unfurling perfectly, every detail intricately aligned. The tension thrummed like a taut string, ready to snap. He didn't know it yet, but the foundation he had built on deception and betrayal was crumbling. The groundwork I had painstakingly laid had festered beneath his feet, ready to yield. His hands shook slightly, betraying the facade of confidence he stubbornly clung to as he reviewed the disordered papers sprawled across the conference table. This was the same table where he had once feasted on our collective success, the same place he had laughed off my concerns, his arrogance projecting invincibility. Now, as financial figures danced erratically before him, miscalculations, discrepancies bright as neon lights, his composure faltered. "Let's discuss the recent audit findings," he began, his voice steadier than it deserved to be. But I could see the cracks, the way his gaze flickered nervously toward the door, as though seeking exit strategies. The executives around him exchanged glances, uncertainty clouding their expressions like storm clouds before a deluge. Whispers began to ripple through the room, insidious as shadows. "Did you hear about those legal inquiries? What's really going on with the partnerships?" My allies, strategically placed among the ranks, ensured that the question of his competence was planted deep in their minds, a poison seed destined to blossom. Every calculated inquiry I had initiated now bore fruit, each one a serrated blade hidden in the guise of corporate protocol. Their growing suspicion pressed in on him like a vice, and I savored it, the exquisite symmetry of the moment. He had taught me all too well about consequences. Where once he had wielded betrayal like a weapon, now he was disarmed, the mask slipping. He looked increasingly frantic, struggling against the tide of voices that questioned his judgment. It was a sweet sight. His downfall was not born of rage but of calculated precision, unfolding slowly like a dark bloom in the night. I reveled in the clarity of it all. This was not merely revenge, it was art, sculpted through patience and restraint. "You need to address these issues immediately," one of the investors interjected, their voice cutting through the mounting tension like a knife. "Your reputation hangs in the balance." Those words felt like fire to me, igniting the room and illuminating his despair. My desire for chaos had been tempered, transmuted into something far more elegant. He was alone, outmatched in a game he thought he had perfected. The moments stretched, thickening with dread, each heartbeat echoing louder in my ears. Inside, I was cold and calculating, no triumphal glee, just a sense of finality. I was the architect of this reckoning, and as he nervously shuffled his papers, I could practically hear his mind racing, desperately searching for an escape route that had all but evaporated. "Listen," he stammered finally, casting looks of desperation to the panel. The glares of his former allies felt sharper now. "We can clarify this. I assure you it's all—" The weight of silence fell hard again, suffocating him. The flicker of hope I saw in his eyes spoke volumes, urging him to offer the same empty platitudes he had served up during our last, disastrous conversation. But now the positions were reversed. He stood on the precipice of his destruction, and there I stood, not in rage but in quiet satisfaction, a ghost guiding the tide of his failure. He would find no mercy here. I had mirrored him fully, revealing that his own strategies were now being used against him. Every deception met with a counter-deception, every lie unspooled into the truth. He was watching his empire unravel and could do nothing but witness the consequences of his actions without absolution. As the meeting spiraled further into discord, I felt my heart steady, every beat laced with purpose. The power was not in my anger, it was in the quiet acceptance of the inevitable. What he had wrought was now his undoing. And finally, when his downfall reached its climax, when the air in the room would grow colder still, I would step forward to face him once more. Not with accusations, not with fury, but in silence, ready to deliver the final reflection. He would look into the gaze of his own failure and understand, far too late, the full measure of what he had lost. This was my masterpiece, the conclusion to a symphony that had played slowly over the months, and every note had led us here. The lessons learned in the crucible of betrayal were now my very armor. I would not shroud a victory in chaos, but allow every piece of his world to collapse under the weight of its own hubris. As I prepared to claim my moment, I felt the satisfaction wash over me. Not victory, but resolution in a world now painted in shades of retribution, where every silence spoke louder than any avowal of defiance. I was ready. The art of my reckoning was complete, and its beauty lay in the precision of its execution. The dawn cast a muted light over the remnants of what had been. I took a breath as I stepped outside, the chill wrapping around me like a familiar cloak. The world felt distant, and yet I stood at the intersection of great change, where moments hung delicately in the air, suspended between past and present. The scars of betrayal remained visibly inked within me, a testament to the journey I had endured. But now they were no longer marks of weakness. They offered structure, a framework built by my own hands. Each step upon the pavement echoed a deeper truth. Each sound of my footfall affirmed the conclusion I had reached. I had dismantled the empire built from my dreams, not out of fury, but with quiet resolve. He, who once wielded betrayal as his sword, felt the stylistic precision of his own tactics wielded against him. But he scarcely understood he had taught me how to orchestrate my escape. I no longer needed to scream for recognition or vindication. The silence spoke loud enough. As I walked away, I felt weightless, liberated from the burdens that had once shackled me. The path stretched ahead, empty and uncharted, promising solitude and clarity. The remnants of his existence, of our shared dreams, faded in my rearview mirror like ghosts, shadows of a life where trust was betrayal and camaraderie turned on a dime. I had become a shadow too, a whisper of his fear, no longer a participant in his game, but the architect of my own reality. There was an eerie calm settling in the wake of my actions. I had buried the chaotic swirl of emotions deep under layers of quiet acceptance. It felt both surreal and powerful. I had reclaimed my life without making a spectacle of it, without ever needing closure from him. All he would know was loss, an unraveling he could not trace back to me. To him, I remained the specter who disappeared, vanishing just as he had once tried to do to me. I watched as trees lined my path, their trunks solid and unyielding, a stark reminder that strength lay in silence. I no longer needed to raise my voice to assert my presence. The rumor of my actions lingered, the power of my quiet vengeance suffusing the air, creating a narrative far more potent than anyone could quantify. I was not just that man he had tried to obliterate. I was reborn as the architect of my own peace. The road continued, stretching endlessly, and I realized I had nothing left to prove. The scars would remain, but they transformed into symbols of survival and resilience, rather than defeat. I had taken the lessons learned in pain and spun them into a web of recovery. I could have come crashing back, but I didn't need to. That choice, no, that power, was what I took with me, walking further away from the tempest that had once dominated my life. And now, every step was an affirmation. I had collected my life, a puzzle pieced together through meticulous thought. Each movement forward was purposeful, deliberate, and infused with the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had emerged on the other side, unscathed, yet transformed. As my footsteps faded into the vast distance, I made peace with the choices that had led me here. Not every story ends with overt resolutions. The beauty lies in the simplicity of an embrace with oneself. I could have hit back. Instead, I rebuilt, quietly, precisely, just like he taught me. The finality resonated in the air, a closing note to my symphony of silence. If you ever feel like you're losing, go silent, go still. Let the pain sit with you until it burns clean, then learn their language and use it like a map. The echoes of my journey interwove with hopes for the futures we left behind, and as a singular figure fading into the horizon, I became the lesson he never saw coming, the man who walked away, leaving nothing behind but silence, and in that silence, all the power I had reclaimed.